Mia had always been fascinated by the thrill of the unknown. It was the kind of curiosity that made her take risks, even when everyone around her warned against it. She was the type of person who didn't just watch horror films or listen to ghost stories. She wanted to experience them herself. And in 2024, when the latest TikTok challenge went viral, she saw an opportunity she couldn't resist. The challenge was simple: spend an hour in a notoriously haunted, abandoned place and document every moment of it. The more terrifying the place, the more views you'd get. People were flocking to abandoned hospitals, old schools, and derelict houses, hoping to catch something spooky on camera. Mia had seen a few of these videos, and while they were definitely creepy, she was sure they were all staged. She didn't believe in ghosts or the supernatural. Sure, she loved a good horror story, but as far as she was concerned, they were just stories. That was until the idea of the challenge crossed her mind. Mia had recently started her own YouTube channel, Haunting Tales, dedicated to telling real-life horror stories. She wanted to make her channel stand out, and the TikTok challenge seemed like the perfect way to attract attention. Her audience was growing, but she needed something big to truly make a name for herself. Her friends, Jake, Emily, and Chris, were all in. They weren't as enthusiastic as Mia, but they followed her lead. The place they chose was an abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. It had been shut down for over 40 years after reports of inhumane treatments, strange disappearances, and rumors of patients being driven mad by the horrors inside. The asylum was known for one thing: its dark history, and that made it perfect for a viral TikTok video. Mia had done her research. She knew the asylum had been the site of several mysterious deaths, but she wasn't bothered by it. Ghosts, curses, and hauntings were just stories, nothing more. She'd heard the whispers about the place, but Mia wasn't someone who scared easily. She was determined to prove that the so-called haunted asylum was just an overhyped ruin with a creepy past. That night, they drove to the asylum, their nerves tingling with excitement. But Mia remained confident. She set up her camera and started streaming for her YouTube channel Haunting Tales, letting her followers know they were about to embark on the adventure of a lifetime. "This is it, guys. We're about to enter one of the most haunted places in town," she said, her voice calm but with a hint of excitement. "Stick with me. You won't want to miss this." The asylum loomed ahead, its broken windows staring back at them like empty eyes. The building looked like something from a nightmare, tall, decaying, and dark. The air was thick with tension, and the wind howled through the trees. Mia clicked her flashlight on, and the beam cut through the darkness like a knife. "All right, let's go," she said, pushing open the rusty front door. As they entered, the musty smell of decay hit them. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and the floors creaked under their weight. Mia pointed her camera around, capturing every detail. "This is unreal," she whispered, more to herself than the camera. "This place has been abandoned for decades, and yet it's still standing." They walked deeper into the building, the silence pressing down on them like a heavy blanket. The only sound was the crunch of broken glass beneath their feet and the occasional distant thud, which Mia dismissed as the building's settling. "It's all in your head," she muttered under her breath. They made their way to the old hospital rooms, their flashlights illuminating the faded, rusted equipment. Mia found an old wheelchair in one of the rooms, its wheels covered in dust. "Guys, this would make a great shot for the TikTok," she said, grinning as she filmed the chair. "Look at this creepy thing." But as they moved further down the hallway, things started to feel different. Mia could feel her heart rate picking up. It was still just an old building, nothing more. But there was something in the air. It was colder here. The silence was heavier. Even the others seemed to notice it, their footsteps now more cautious. Then, suddenly, Mia's camera flickered. The screen went black for a split second before turning back on. She frowned, but shrugged it off. "It's just a glitch," she said, trying to calm her nerves. But as she looked around, something in the corner of her eye caught her attention, a figure standing in one of the doorways. Mia spun around, but the doorway was empty. "Did anyone else see that?" she asked, her voice shaky. Jake, Emily, and Chris looked at each other, but no one spoke. They all felt it, an unsettling presence. But they were too deep into it now. They couldn't back out. Mia turned the camera to face her group. "All right, let's keep going," she said, though her voice was now laced with uncertainty. "We're going to make it to the basement. That's where the real action happened." As they descended into the basement, the temperature dropped even further. The walls were damp, and the air smelled of mildew and something else, something metallic. Mia's phone screen flickered again, and this time she couldn't deny that something was wrong. "I don't like this," Chris muttered, his voice trembling. Suddenly, the door to one of the basement rooms slammed shut, making them all jump. "It's just the wind," Mia said, but her voice was tight. She quickly swung her camera to film the door, but when she looked back at it, the door had opened on its own. "Okay, that's not possible," Emily whispered. "We didn't touch it." Mia's breath caught in her throat. The atmosphere was thick with something she couldn't explain. And then it happened. The whispers. Faint at first, but growing louder with each passing second. They were coming from every direction. But when Mia pointed her flashlight around, there was no one there. Just empty rooms. "Who's messing with us?" Mia called out, but no one responded. The whispers grew into frantic voices, and Mia's camera picked up distorted, shadowy figures moving in the dark corners of the basement. "This is not a joke," she said, her heart pounding in her chest. "We need to get out of here." But as they turned to leave, the door at the top of the stairs slammed shut, trapping them inside. "What the hell is going on?" Jake yelled. "We need to leave now!" Mia's phone started to malfunction. The screen was covered with static, and the video feed turned to black and white, distorting everything. She tried to turn it off, but it wouldn't respond. The voices grew louder. "Get out! Leave this place!" until they were deafening. And then the figures emerged from the shadows, tall, distorted, their faces hollow and empty. Mia and her friends ran for the door, pushing and shoving, but the basement door wouldn't budge. It was as if the house itself was holding them captive. They screamed, trying to push it open, but nothing worked. Finally, in a panic, Mia smashed the door with all her strength, and it gave way. They stumbled into the night, gasping for breath, their hearts racing. When they finally looked back, the asylum stood silent, as if nothing had happened. But the feeling of being watched lingered in the air. The next morning, Mia reviewed the footage from Haunting Tales. What she saw froze her blood. The figures were there, but not just in the shadows. Some had been following them, their distorted faces glaring at the camera. And then, at the very end, a message appeared on the screen. "You shouldn't have come." Mia knew one thing for certain after that night. Some places weren't meant to be explored, and some challenges weren't meant to be completed.
In early 2024, a chilling story circulated through the small town of Milltown, nestled in the northern hills. The town, with its quaint streets and old brick buildings, had always been a quiet place where everyone knew each other. But in recent months, something had changed. People started talking about strange shadows following them at night, and some even claimed to see figures standing in their windows when no one was home. Lena Turner, a local journalist and passionate horror enthusiast, had heard the rumors, but she wasn't one to believe in superstition. She had always prided herself on her skepticism, preferring to approach things with logic and reason. But when one of her friends, Sarah, started acting distant and terrified, Lena couldn't ignore the growing unease in the town any longer. Sarah had always been the kind of person who would laugh off scary stories, but now she was different. She barely slept. Her eyes were hollow, and she kept glancing over her shoulder like she was being watched. Lena noticed how Sarah's behavior changed after she moved into an old Victorian house just outside Milltown's main street. The house was known for being abandoned for years, but when Sarah bought it, she thought it was the perfect opportunity to start fresh. Little did she know, the house had a dark history. It was Sarah who first mentioned the shadows. "I swear, Lena, I see them every night," Sarah said one evening, her voice trembling. "They follow me around the house, just standing there, watching. I can't take it anymore. It's like they're waiting for me to do something, but I don't know what." Lena's logical side tried to dismiss it. "Maybe you're just stressed, Sarah. You know how it is when you move into a new place. Old houses creak and the wind can play tricks on you." But Sarah wasn't convinced. "No, Lena. This is different. I've been hearing voices too, whispering my name. Every night I hear them getting closer." Lena decided to investigate. She wasn't about to let some silly superstition take hold of her friend, especially since she had seen the exact same thing happen in some of the horror movies she loved. "I'll come by tomorrow night," Lena said, trying to sound reassuring. "We'll figure this out." That night, Lena arrived at Sarah's house just after sunset. The house was eerily quiet, its windows like dark eyes staring out into the night. The wind howled through the trees, sending a shiver down Lena's spine. She felt a strange chill in the air, but she dismissed it. After all, it was just a draft. As she entered the house, the floorboards creaked under her weight. The living room was dimly lit, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally across the walls. Sarah was sitting on the couch, her hands trembling as she hugged her knees to her chest. Her eyes were wide with fear. "I'm glad you're here," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how much longer I can take this." Lena sat beside her, trying to remain calm. "Tell me everything that's been happening, Sarah." Sarah took a deep breath. "It started a few weeks ago. I was sitting in the living room just reading a book when I felt something behind me. I turned around and there was nothing, but I kept seeing these shadows out of the corner of my eye, moving across the walls. And then I started hearing the whispers. At first, they were soft, like a breeze, but now they're louder, almost like they're speaking my name." Lena listened carefully, noting the fear in Sarah's voice. "What do the shadows look like?" "They're tall," Sarah said, her eyes wide with terror. "They're not human, though. They're not human, though. They're figures, dark and twisted. And their eyes glow. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like they're alive." Lena's heart skipped a beat, but she shook her head. "Okay, Sarah, let's go check the house together. We'll see if we can figure out what's going on. Shadows like that don't just appear for no reason." They spent the next few hours walking through the house, checking every room. The air felt thick, like they were being suffocated by the silence. Every creak of the floorboards sent Lena's nerves on edge. They walked through the hallway, and as they reached the stairs, Lena's flashlight flickered for a moment. She didn't think much of it at first, but as they ascended the stairs, Lena felt something, a presence, something watching them from the shadows at the end of the hall. "Did you feel that?" Lena asked, her voice tight. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "It's them. They're here. They've been waiting for us." Lena turned toward the source of the sensation. At the far end of the hallway, a shadow seemed to shift, moving slowly toward them. It was tall and thin, like a silhouette of a person, but there was something wrong about it. The shadow didn't belong to anything. It just stood there. "Sarah, we need to leave. Now," Lena said, her voice trembling. She didn't believe in ghosts, but what she was seeing was not something she could explain. Before they could turn around, the whispering started. It was faint at first, but then it grew louder, like 1,000 voices speaking at once. "Lena, Sarah." The voice echoed through the house, the air growing colder with every passing second. Then the shadow moved, its shape becoming clearer. It had no features, no eyes, no mouth, just an empty void. But it was coming toward them, and it was coming fast. Lena grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her back toward the stairs. "Run!" she yelled, her heart racing. They bolted down the stairs, but the shadow seemed to follow them, its presence suffocating, like a weight pressing on their chest. Lena felt as though the very walls were closing in on them. They reached the front door, but it wouldn't open. Lena tugged at the handle, but it was stuck. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. "You cannot leave." Finally, with one last desperate pull, Lena threw the door open and they ran outside into the night. They didn't stop until they reached the safety of Lena's car. Both women were panting, their hearts still racing. Lena looked at Sarah, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "What the hell was that?" Lena asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know," Sarah whispered. "But it's not over. It's just beginning." The next day, Lena returned to a Haunting Tales YouTube channel, ready to share the terrifying experience. She recorded a video, explaining what had happened, though her voice was still filled with fear. "I don't know what Sarah and I encountered that night, but I can tell you this, it wasn't human. If you ever come across something like this, don't ignore it. It's real, and it's waiting for you." Lena didn't sleep much after that, and neither did Sarah. The town of Milltown would never be the same again. The shadows were still out there, creeping in the corners of the world, waiting for the next person to cross their path. In the summer of 2024, a shocking story surfaced from the rural village of Hollow Creek, located deep in the English countryside. Hollow Creek wasn't even marked on many maps, and locals barely remembered it existing. The village had vanished completely, leaving behind nothing but a few scattered rumors and a video that made its way across social media. The tale behind the disappearance would chill anyone who heard it. It all began when a group of college students, known for their fascination with the paranormal, decided to explore the forgotten village. They had been researching abandoned places for months, and Hollow Creek seemed like the perfect destination for their next adventure. The village had been abandoned for decades after a mysterious fire consumed most of its buildings in the 1960 seconds. But what intrigued the students even more was the rumors that the village was still inhabited by something other than the living. The students, led by their fearless leader Jake, didn't believe in ghosts or curses. They were there for the thrill, to film a video that would bring them fame and subscribers. Armed with cameras and flashlights, they ventured into Hollow Creek one warm evening in late June. As they approached the village, the atmosphere shifted. The trees that bordered Hollow Creek were tall and twisted, their branches twisting like skeletal arms. The sky above them was overcast, and a heavy fog began to roll in, shrouding the village like a veil. The silence was unnatural. There were no animals, no sounds of life at all, just the faint rustle of leaves. "Well, this is it," Jake said, turning to his friends. "Hollow Creek. Let's make some history." They set up camp near the remains of what used to be the village square. The fire pit was still there, surrounded by blackened stones. The buildings were nothing more than crumbling shells, their walls charred and covered in vines. But as the group explored further, they noticed something odd. The air felt thick, like they were walking through water. It was stifling, and every breath felt heavier than the last. "Something's not right, Ellie," one of the students said nervously. "I feel watched." Jake dismissed her concerns. "It's just the fog messing with your head. We're going to get some great shots for the channel. Trust me." But as night fell, the fog grew thicker, and something else began to happen. The temperature dropped abruptly. The group huddled around their fire, trying to stay warm, but the chill seemed to seep into their bones. "Did anyone else hear that?" Mark, another student, asked, his voice trembling. They all stopped and listened. At first, it was just a faint whisper, like the wind carrying voices. But then it grew louder, more distinct. It was coming from the village itself, from the ruins that surrounded them. "Hello," Jake called out, his voice shaky. "Is someone there?" There was no answer, just the eerie sound of whispers, as if hundreds of voices were talking at once. It was a language they didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakably urgent, almost desperate. "This is getting freaky," Ellie said, backing away from the fire. "We should leave." Before anyone could respond, a shadow appeared at the edge of the village square. It was a figure, tall and cloaked in black, its face hidden in the darkness. The figure moved slowly, gliding across the ground as if it wasn't walking at all, but floating. The group froze in place. "Who's there?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. The figure didn't respond. It simply moved closer, its presence suffocating, filling the air with dread. The whispers grew louder, now coming from all around them. The figure stopped in front of them, and Jake felt a coldness wash over him, as if the temperature had dropped by 10 degrees in an instant. Suddenly, there was a flash of light, blinding them all for a moment. When the light faded, the figure was gone. In its place was a large, ancient stone tablet, covered in runes that none of them could recognize. The runes were glowing faintly, casting an eerie light around the village square. "What the hell?" Mark said, stepping forward. "What is this?" Lena, the most sensitive of the group, reached out to touch the tablet. As her fingers brushed against the stone, a jolt of electricity shot through her arm, and she screamed in pain, pulling her hand back. The whispers returned, louder than before, and now they were coming from the stone tablet itself. The voices were angry, the tone menacing. "Leave now," they seemed to say. "You are not welcome here." "Okay, we need to go." Jake said, his earlier bravado gone. Now? But when they turned to leave, the village was different. The path they had taken to enter was no longer visible. The trees were now closer, the fog denser. The group was trapped. They walked in circles for what felt like hours, but the village square never seemed to move further away. Every time they thought they saw an exit, they were led back to the same spot. "What the hell is going on?" Ellie shouted. "Why can't we leave?" The whispers grew louder, surrounding them completely. "You should not have come," the voices cried. "Now you belong to us." Suddenly, one of the buildings seemed to shift. The walls of a nearby house creaked and groaned, and the door swung open. A pale figure stood in the doorway, its face twisted in a grotesque smile. It was then that Lena realized none of them had seen this figure before. It was an entity, not a person. "Run!" Jake screamed. "Shh!" screamed. They bolted, but no matter which direction they ran, they found themselves back in the center of the village. The stone tablet was still there, glowing ominously. The whispers became deafening, swirling around them like a storm. In a panic, they pulled out their phones to record what was happening. The footage was chaotic, but one thing was clear. The village wasn't just abandoned, it was alive. The buildings seemed to warp and distort around them, and the figures that appeared at the edges of the village were not human. They were something else entirely. The students realized, too late, that the village wasn't a place, it was a trap. It was a living, breathing entity that had been waiting for them. The footage they recorded that night was later uploaded to the internet, but it was incomplete. The last few seconds of the video showed the group running toward the stone tablet, but the footage cut off abruptly, as if the camera had been shut off. The students were never seen again. When Lena Turner from Haunting Tales reviewed the footage as part of her deep dive into supernatural occurrences, she couldn't help but feel the unease that lingered in her chest. She had seen a lot of scary stories, but this one was different. There's something more going on here than we understand, she said in her video, the fear in her voice evident. This village wasn't abandoned. It was waiting for them. And now it's waiting for you. Since then, Hollow Creek has been marked on no map. The village has simply disappeared, as if it never existed. The last known footage of the students is all that remains, a reminder that some places are not meant to be found. In late October 2024, an unsettling story began to spread online. It started as a simple, almost innocent post on Reddit, but quickly gained traction, capturing the attention of thousands. The title of the post was unassuming, a strange message from the future. But once people started reading, they quickly realized it wasn't just another glitch or prank, it was something far more terrifying. The post was written by a college student named Ethan, who had been working late on a project in his cramped dorm room. He had always been skeptical of anything supernatural or paranormal, dismissing strange occurrences as mere coincidences or overactive imaginations. But that was before he received the message. It all began with a phone call. Ethan had been sitting at his desk, headphones on, listening to music while browsing through social media. His phone vibrated on the table, and he glanced at the screen, expecting to see a text from a friend. But instead, there was an unknown number flashing in front of him. Curious but cautious, he answered, "Hello." There was a long pause. The only sound was static and a faint, distorted hum. Then, a voice came through the line, a voice he didn't recognize. "Ethan," the voice said, its tone flat, emotionless. "You don't know me, but I know you." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He sat up straight, confused and a little creeped out. "Who is this?" The voice didn't respond directly. Instead, it began speaking in a strange, almost robotic tone. "You will receive a message soon. It is important that you listen carefully. Time is running out." Ethan tried to interrupt, but the voice continued. "The message will come in the form of a text. It will seem strange, like a code. But you must read it. Your life depends on it." Before Ethan could ask any more questions, the line went dead. His phone screen flickered, and the call ended. He sat there for a moment, feeling a rush of cold air in the room despite the heater running. Shaking his head, he dismissed the call as a prank or some kind of telemarketing scam, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next day, when Ethan returned to his dorm after class, he found a text message waiting for him. The message was unlike anything he had ever received. It wasn't just random gibberish. It was an eerie combination of symbols, numbers, and words that didn't seem to make sense at first glance. The message read, "The end begins at the clock's 11:11. Seek the door you've never opened. The truth lies beneath, but only if you are brave enough to face it." Ethan stared at the screen, his fingers hovering over the text. It made no sense. What did it mean? Who had sent it? And why 11:11? He felt a chill crawl up his spine, but decided to ignore it. After all, this was just some weird prank, right? But then the strange event started to happen. Over the next few days, Ethan began noticing odd things around him. At odd hours, clocks in his dorm room would stop at exactly 11:11. His phone would glitch, showing random notifications from apps he hadn't used in years. His friends started mentioning things he hadn't told them, like the color of his shirt or the specific brand of coffee he drank that morning. The messages continued to come, each more cryptic than the last. One day, he received another text that read, "The door is in front of you. Do not look back. The past will try to stop you." The texts were always unsettling, and they seemed to be guiding him towards something he couldn't quite understand. Then the night came when everything changed. At exactly 11:11 p.m., Ethan received a final message. "Tonight is the night. The door is waiting. You must open it. Your future depends on what you find behind it." Ethan sat frozen for a moment, his phone glowing in his hand. The message felt different. It was urgent, like something big was about to happen. His heart began to race, and his mind buzzed with questions. What door? And how could this be real? He turned to the small closet in his dorm room, which had a door he had never bothered to open before. It was an old, creaky door, one that had been there since he moved in, but he always assumed it was just a closet for extra storage. There was nothing special about it. Or was there? Compelled by something he couldn't explain, Ethan stood up, his legs trembling slightly. He walked to the door, his hand hovering over the knob. His breath seemed to catch in his throat as he slowly turned the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow room that he had never seen before. It was small, with only a single dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The air inside felt heavy, suffocating. As Ethan stepped forward, he noticed something strange on the floor, a large black object covered in dust, almost like a box or a chest. With a mix of fear and curiosity, Ethan bent down to examine it. It was a strange metallic box, unlike anything he had ever seen. There were symbols carved into its surface, symbols that seemed familiar, but he couldn't place them. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cold metal. Suddenly, the room felt like it was spinning. The walls seemed to stretch and distort, and Ethan felt as though he was being pulled into the box itself. His vision blurred, and for a split second, he was no longer in his dorm room. He was standing in a desolate, futuristic city, surrounded by towering buildings and strange, glowing lights. The air was thick with a strange hum, and the only sound was the distant buzz of machinery. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the vision ended. Ethan was back in his dorm room, gasping for air. His phone vibrated in his hand, and he looked down at the screen. There was a new message. "You've seen the future, Ethan. You've opened the door. What you saw was a warning. A future that will come unless you stop it." Ethan didn't know what to make of it. Was this some sort of elaborate prank? Or was something more sinister going on? In a panic, Ethan turned to his Haunting Tales YouTube channel, hoping that sharing his story with his followers would help him make sense of what had happened. As he recounted the strange events and showed the footage from the night, he couldn't help but feel that his story was far from over. "I'm not sure what's going on," he said in his video. "But I know one thing: it's not over, and it might not ever be." The video went viral, sparking an online debate about the nature of time, fate, and the possibility of parallel dimensions. But as Ethan sat in his room, staring at the screen, he couldn't shake the feeling that the strange message he had received was far more than a warning. It was a call to action, a call that he wasn't sure he was ready to answer. In Riverside Park, located in the heart of the city, the park was known for its scenic walking paths, towering trees, and peaceful atmosphere. But on the night of November 2024, something disturbing happened that would forever change the way people viewed the park and the strange figure that appeared in the shadows. The story begins with a local man named Daniel. Daniel was a regular jogger in Riverside Park, someone who found peace in the rhythm of his runs and the solitude of the park after dark. He had always been a creature of habit, following the same paths every evening, losing himself in the simplicity of his exercise routine. But one night, something happened that he couldn't explain. It was a crisp evening, the air cool with a light breeze. As Daniel made his way down his usual route, he noticed something unusual: a man standing at the far end of the park, near the old stone bridge. The man was tall, dressed in a long, dark coat, and his face was obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, casting a shadow over his features. He stood perfectly still, as if waiting for someone. At first, Daniel thought nothing of it. He figured the man was just another jogger, or someone out for a late-night walk. But as he drew closer, something about the man's presence made him uneasy. There was a stillness to him that felt unnatural, like he wasn't just standing there but had been there for a very long time. As Daniel passed, he couldn't help but glance at the man. The stranger didn't move, didn't acknowledge Daniel in any way, but for a brief moment, their eyes met. It was a split-second glance, but Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The man's eyes were cold, empty, like two hollow pits. They were dark, unblinking, and they seemed to pierce through him. A chill ran down his spine, and a sense of dread washed over him. He quickly looked away and continued running, trying to shake off the uncomfortable feeling. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the encounter in his mind, the image of the man's cold, soulless eyes haunting him. The next evening, he decided to return to the park, hoping to put his mind at ease. But when he reached the spot where he had seen the man, he couldn't find him. The area was empty, no figure in the dark coat, no shadowy figure standing by the bridge. Just the usual stillness of the park. Daniel brushed it off as his imagination playing tricks on him, but the unease lingered. Days passed, and Daniel continued his evening jogs, but the memory of the strange man stayed with him. It wasn't until a week later that things began to take a darker turn. On this particular night, Daniel arrived at the park later than usual. The sky was dark and a thick fog had begun to roll in from the river, blanketing the park in an eerie silence. As he jogged down the familiar path, he noticed something unsettling. The same man was standing by the stone bridge again. This time, however, the man wasn't alone. There were other figures standing in the distant silhouettes that Daniel couldn't quite make out in the fog. They were all facing the same direction, their heads lowered as if they were waiting for something. Daniel slowed down as he approached, his instincts telling him to turn around, to leave the park and never come back. But curiosity got the better of him. He continued jogging, his eyes darting from figure to figure, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. As he passed the man in the long coat, he couldn't help but glance at him again. The man's eyes were still cold and lifeless, but this time there was something else, something new. The man's lips curled into a twisted smile. A smile that didn't belong on a human face. It was unnatural, grotesque. Grotesque. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he quickened his pace, feeling the weight of the man's gaze still on him. He didn't dare look back, but the feeling of being watched intensified. The figures in the fog seemed to follow him, their presence becoming more oppressive with each step. When Daniel finally reached the exit of the park, he didn't stop running until he was safely in his apartment, his breath coming in sharp gasps. He locked the door and collapsed on his bed, his mind racing. What had happened in that park? Who were those figures? And what was that man? The next day, Daniel went to the police station, hoping to make sense of the strange occurrences. He described what he had seen, but the officers were skeptical. There were no reports of missing persons or strange happenings in Riverside Park. They chalked it up to his imagination, telling him to avoid the park after dark and to take care of himself. But something in Daniel's gut told him that he wasn't imagining things. The man in the park was real, and he was more than just an ordinary person. He was something else, something that didn't belong in their world. It wasn't until a few weeks later, after Daniel had stopped jogging in the park, that the truth came out. A local news report broke the story. A body had been discovered in Riverside Park, near the stone bridge. It was a man dressed in a dark coat, just like the one Daniel had seen. The strange part: the man's face was completely blank, his features had been erased, as if he had never existed at all. The police ruled it as an unexplained death, but the incident didn't end there. Over the following weeks, more bodies were found in the park, always in the same spot. Always the same eerie circumstances. The victims were dressed in dark coats, their faces featureless and empty. Daniel, now terrified, went to his Haunting Tales channel to share his story, hoping that someone could explain what was happening in Riverside Park. In his video, he showed footage of the park, the fog rolling in, and the eerie silence that hung over the place. "What I saw," Daniel said in the video, his voice shaky, "wasn't just a man. It was something far worse. I think they're still there, and they're waiting for someone else to see them." Since then, the park has been closed off to the public. The authorities have no explanation for the strange disappearances, and the figures that Daniel saw in the fog remain a mystery. But one thing is certain: Riverside Park is not what it seems, and anyone who ventures there after dark might never return. This is the last of the 5 stories. I hope they meet your expectations. If you'd like me to make any adjustments or add anything specific, feel free to let me know.